Well, hello, everybody. This is Tim Green with the Rattle Magazine. Welcome to Rattlecast number 199. So glad you could join me. Today's guest is Barbara Hamby. She'll be here in about 10 minutes. But before we begin, I should say that Rattle is a publication of the Rattle Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit working to promote the practice of poetry. We've been in continuous publication since 1995 and are unaffiliated with any other organization. We just do this because we love poetry, and I know you do too, so please do click the like button and share. Make sure you're subscribed. Ring the bell for notifications. Whatever you can do to help poetry spread around the internet would be much appreciated. And I really do mean that. So click something right now if you're watching it either on Facebook or YouTube, or leave a review on iTunes. It really does help. It helps a lot. So you can even look at like the number of likes and stuff, and that translates into more views, and then more people get to share and understand and appreciate great poetry. So help us out if you would. Now we're going to start out with the Poet Respond poets, as we always do. Dante di Stefano, who's a regular in Poet Respond, is not here today. He is at a work party, I guess, but he's going to be the main guest. He has a book out, so he's going to be the main guest on August 7th, we decided. So if you're missing Dante, you'll be able to see him then. But his poem is about the death of Cormac McCarthy and Father's Day and like the violence of his novels. It was a very complicated poem. And let me take a look at it here, and then we'll play Dante's recording for the show. So everybody who hasn't seen it yet gets to give it a listen on your podcast. But Dante says, Cormac McCarthy is one of my favorite novelists. I wrote this thinking about his death this week and the ways in which McCarthy's books have helped me understand our nation's romance with brutality. I was also thinking about how I might explain some of this to my small children. I've read The Hungry Caterpillar and Brown Bear, What Do You See 1,000 times in the past 5 years. In Carl's books, The World in all its wonder unfolds. I thought it would be interesting to look at McCarthy's grim, fatalistic view of human nature through the lens of Carly's imagination. The last two words of the poem, which are fly them, are the last two words of my favorite Cormac McCarthy novel, Sutri. And here's Dante di Stefano reading his poem. I'll let him read the title because it's very long. We want to say it twice. But here he is. Here's Dante.
After the death of Cormac McCarthy, I look at the locust tree out my classroom window and try to explain the violence at the heart of the American experience to my children in the manner of an Eric Carle book. Over there is a green thing in the way, under the silver of the moon that isn't shining, because it is the daytime, and on its many arms there are so many thorns you could call it a coat, a thorn coat. And there is always someone climbing its trunk and hurting their hands so much so. A little boy is climbing and a little girl is climbing, and with them the ghosts of their dead grandparents and their unborn children's children, and a caterpillar who only knows how to eat and eat, thorn and leaf, on the way to becoming a butterfly, and a brown bear, and a goldfish out of water flopping upward, and a wolf pup, and a lion cub, and an eagle without a nest, and you and me, and every mother and father, and son and daughter who ever was. We are all climbing and climbing and climbing until our hands ache and ache and ache, and make a cradle of that ache, and hang a lullaby in the air above that cradle. And we are all going up and up and up, and it is painful and strange because we are all also falling down and down and down, deeper than the deepest part of the ocean, which is singing to us in the way a humpback whale does, or in the way the waves sing to the shore. And if you listen very closely, you can hear a great, great writer whispering to the waves in us and the trees in us and the thorns and all that climbing and all those cut palms and bleeding fingers. Listen, he is ending his book. He is ending the great book of his life. He has no say in this, but he is saying on the last page, fly them.
Yeah, he's ending great book of his life. A great poem there by Dante di Stefano, in remembrance of Cormac McCarthy. I don't know what Dante's new book is about. He's setting it, hasn't gotten here yet, but hopefully it's about fatherhood, I can imagine, because so many of his poems are about that, and fatherhood ties so much into Cormac McCarthy with The Road, too. We had a whole bunch of poems submitted this year, or this week, about fathers and Father's Day because of the father figures in McCarthy's novels. So interesting to see there, and a good tie-in for Dante. So we'll look forward to seeing him and learning more about Dante on August 7th. Now we are going to move on to tomorrow's poet, a secret surprise bonus. Erin Murphy is here. Erin was the guest on Rattlecast about a year ago, and here she is with a new poem about the I-95 collapse in the Philadelphia area. So hey, Erin, how you doing? You got to unmute.
Unmuting.
There you go.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for giving all of us the opportunity to engage with the world every week as writers, as readers, and as listeners.
Yeah, it's just so great to have you here, and we loved your work with your demi-sonnets, remember, from that episode, and all the great stuff you do editing.
You wrote a great
too.
demi-sonnet that week.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, it's fun. I mean, it's a great form. I really liked it a lot. But this poem is not a demi-sonnet. It's a longer form in a series. And tell us what's about and why you were inspired to write it. In case people haven't heard, some people like me live under bubbles. I did hear about this, but there are a lot of news stories I didn't even hear about. Right. And this is a sort of a big one if you live in the Eastern Corridor, right?
Right. So last week's tanker truck crash on I-95 basically shut down I-95 in both directions because the truck caught on fire, and then it melted these steel beams, and a whole span of I-95 collapsed. But before I talk a little bit more about the poem, I just wanted to acknowledge the loss of life that happened in this tragedy, because the truck driver was a 53-year-old man named Nathan Moody. He was from New Jersey, and he preferred the short hauls for his trucking job because he wanted to be able to spend more time with his 7-year-old daughter who survives him. So the poem is not about Mr. Moody, but I did want to acknowledge him. The poem has to do with my experiences living near I-95 for more than half of my life. And yesterday, I was listening to the poet Robin Costa Lewis. She was talking about growing up in Louisiana and how the Mississippi River is such a significant tributary, running through the United States. And I thought, well, for those of us on the East Coast, I-95 kind of functions that way unexpectedly. And a week ago, last Sunday, I was sitting in a bar in Charleston, West Virginia, as one does. But I was sitting with the poets Mark Harshman and Jerry LaFemina, and we were getting ready to give a reading in the festival, as they call it, in Charleston. And we were hearing the news about this collapse. And it really affected me on kind of a visceral level, surprisingly. And I think that was because we tend to think of all the negative elements of a highway and an interstate, and you're on the West Coast, and I know all about that in the LA area. You think of the pollution, and you think of the traffic, and you think of accidents and noise. And I hadn't really thought that much about how, even if something is kind of a negative experience, when it happens enough, when you're in that space enough, you end up having formative experiences there. And so that's where the poem came from.
Yeah, it's really interesting to think of it, compared to something like the Mississippi, but it's so, even more people flow up and down that than the Mississippi. And
it's the most traveled road in the United States.
Yeah, those concrete rivers. It's really interesting to think of it that way as like parallel. But let's hear it. It's this I-95 corridor. Go ahead.
Okay, so it's a longish poem. It's about 4.5 minutes to read. I-95 corridor. 1. This is where I was cited for reckless driving, and my uncle quipped, 95 is the route number, not the speed limit. 2. This is where I stopped with an ex-boyfriend on the last stretch from Miami, and a motel clerk asked if we wanted the all-night or hourly rate. 3. This is where my grad school U-Haul broke down, and I waited for the wrecker with a Swiss Army knife flexed against my bare thigh. 4. This is where I learned all the lyrics to Dylan's Subterranean Homesick Blues, rewinding the cassette till it snapped in the deck. 5. This is where I interviewed for an adjunct teaching gig that would cost me more in tolls and gas than I'd earn. 6. This is where thieves took my Plymouth Breeze on a joyride, then dumped it on the shoulder, my just cashed paycheck still in the console. 7. This is where my husband missed an exit for the symphony and grazed a concrete pillar beneath an underpass. 8. This is where I ordered my daughter vanilla ice cream with extra maraschino cherries after she lay corpse still for her first echocardiogram. 9. This is where a tanker truck caught fire, melting the highway's steel beams until an entire span collapsed like a ruptured aorta. 10. Corridor. A long, narrow passage between rooms or land or time. 11. They are still sifting through the truck driver's remains. 12. I can never remember if it's steal oneself or steal oneself. Am I supposed to harden my feelings or shove them under my shirt like a shoplifter? 13. In the show I'm watching, one corridor leads to another, rough cut after rough cut of white walls in a workplace maze. 14. The day of the symphony, we abandoned our SUV on the off-ramp and ran 4 blocks to the concert hall, plunking into plush seats just in time for da-da-da-dum. 15. Commute. Hospital, concert, wedding, commute, bar mitzvah, commute, funeral, commute. 16. Lately, I need to sit closer to the throat of a bass trombone or purring cat to feel a stirring in my pulse. 17. My uncle is gone now, a stroke 2 days before Christmas. 18. For years, I replayed that last conversation in my ex's red Jetta, his hands trying to bend the steering wheel, his eyes swollen. 19. What's the difference between carefree and careless? 20. I'm not sure. I want to know. 21. So many bodies and bodies in motion. 22. I can't steal myself. I'm already stolen.
And that was I-95 Corridor by Erin Murphy, tomorrow's Poet of the Day on Rattle.com, coming out to all you email subscribers first thing in the morning. And Erin, I wanted to ask about this poem in the way that, there's a way, so Holoholo is an aimless walk that Barbara Hamby is going to come up with. And it's her book title coming up. And I'm thinking about how poetry is kind of an aimless walk. And it feels like you were listing details here before you got to that steel and steel kind of connection, which turns the poem into, that's sort of what the movement in the poem is, to get to that point. Is that something that came to you in the process of the poem? What's the process like? Were you just listing out all the memories and then you came up with that?
Right. So for me, poems frequently start with some kind of feeling, in this case, this reaction to the collapse of the highway, something that I don't understand, that I sort of worry in my mind, but it doesn't start to take shape as a poem until I have a line or an image, and frequently that's rooted in language. So for me, when I heard about the steel melting, and of course thought of 9/11 and the World Trade Center, you think of steel as something that can't possibly melt. That's what led to the image of the homonym of steel, S-T-E-E-L, S-T-E-A-L. And I literally confuse those all the time with that steal oneself. And so that was really sort of the moment that it started becoming a poem. It starts with the catalog, right? The list, of all of these, incidents and experiences on 95. but I wanted that rupture in the middle of the poem, the same way the interstate, ruptured. All of that said, a lot of it you're kind of thinking and sort of thinking and not thinking, while you're making these notes and working and rearranging, all of that. And it makes me think of what Mallarmé said to Degas when Degas said, that he could write so many poems, but he can't, even though he has all these ideas. And Mallarmé said, poems aren't, made of ideas, they're made of words. And I think that's really what it comes down to, these sort of building blocks of the part of the poem, much the way you have the infrastructure of so many things in our country, like highways.
Yeah, it's really true because it's a great example of, you just see the poet brain in action, that kind of associative part that we use. Really cool poem, and happy to be sharing it tomorrow, Erin. Thanks for joining us again.
Thank you so much, Tim.
Yep.
Looking forward to hearing Barbara.
Yep, have a good night. Yeah, once again, that was Erin Murphy with tomorrow's poem, I-95 Corridor. And now we're going to take a quick break and go to our main guest, Barbara Hamby. So sit tight, and I will be right back with Barbara. Welcome back. Thanks, everybody, for your patience. As I mentioned, Barbara Hamby is the guest today. Barbara is a professor at Florida State University, specializing in poetry and fiction. She's the author of 7 books, with an 8th coming out soon. Most recent one is Holoholo, which we already mentioned. Also, Bird Odyssey, which came out in 2018. So we're reading poems from both of those, and then a couple from the new book, too, that's forthcoming. Her book of linked stories, Lester's Higata's 20th Century, won the 2010 Iowa Short Fiction Award, John Simmons Award, and was published by the University of Iowa Press. She also co-edited an anthology of poetry, Seriously Funny, with her husband David Kirby, who's been a guest on the Rattlecast before. When was that? Was that last fall, or was it 2 years ago? It's hard to even remember at this point. But somewhere in the past, if you go to rattle.com/Rattlecast, you'll find David Kirby's excellent Rattlecast as well. But Barbara was the 2010 Guggenheim Fellow in Poetry. Her poems have appeared all over the place, the best places: New Yorker Poetry, Rattle, of course, and the Paris Review, American Poetry Review, and others. And she's been in Best American Poetry 3 times, listed here at least. So here she is, Barbara Hamby. Hey, Barbara, it's great to have you on.
It's great to be here. Thanks so much for asking me, Tim.
Yeah, it's really my pleasure. I've been a fan of your work for so long, and it's great to finally have you an issue of Rattle. We don't ask people for poems, so I was always secretly I hope she'll send some poems sometime. And then you finally did. So I was really glad to see that. And then so we get to publish Box Ode in the summer issue, which just came out. But do you want to start out with a poem so people can get a sense of your style?
Okay. One of the, I thought I'd start out by just reading some things from my new book, and I have no idea what the title of that is going to be. So, but this one is called, actually, all of these poems are odes, which is my kind of my thing right now, is writing odes on just different subjects. I came to the ode through Neruda and Keats. I loved the music of Keats's lines, but I loved Neruda's praise of the ordinary. And so one of the things, when you read a definition of the ode, it's a poem of praise, but I think it's more a poem of negotiation. I think it started out being a negotiation between the gods and human beings. A human poet would be writing to a god or a goddess. And but around the time of the Romantics, it started becoming a negotiation with one's own consciousness. So I think that that's still where we are. So this is called Ode on Luck. And I think about luck all the time because I feel lucky, but also too, I think that we make our own luck as well. And so, not that I have any answers in this poem, and it starts out with a lot of questions. And I think that for me, a good poem or a poem that I feel good about is one that asks a lot of questions and maybe has some answers, but not all of them by any stretch of the imagination. So this is Ode on Luck. What was I thinking when I got into cars with boys I hardly knew and drove to houses out in the country where my screams would be muffled by the oaks and pines and the teeming carpet of mushrooms? Too stupid to know I wasn't even close to being free, though I thought I was. But all that happened was we listened to Blood on the Tracks and tried to write down lyrics in the flittering of candles. And I was dropped off at my apartment, all too alive to the possibilities of mayhem. Where was I going when I walked down the streets in my armor of beauty and youth, lying in the sun, thinking of Anais Nin in Paris, Rimbaud in Abyssinia, Kafka in Prague? How did I translate my dreams into Italian? Not by planning, that's for sure, because I had no plans, unless you could call reading a plan or daydreaming a plan or making soup a plan. So if I could ask Lady Luck, what was the secret to wooing her? She might say not giving a fig was a big part of it. Also being happy with a stack of books and infinite cups of tea, or watching all those bummer foreign films like The Marriage of Maria Brown and Last Year at Marienbad, throwing the tarot 100 million times to see what was going to happen in the future when it was going to happen anyway, or visiting psychics who are canny in the extreme, figuring out pretty quickly that when they told me I was going to have 2, 3, 6 children, the look on my face meant this was not my dream come true. Though there was the one in Houston who said that in a few days I was going to have someone scream at me, but not to get involved because I had nothing to do with what was going on. And a few days later, that's what happened. One of my best students started screaming at me, but it was because her mother was trying to take her daughter from her. And I was a great stand-in, maybe looked like her mother. So that was a piece of luck, me being tipped off by the psychic and Deborah having someone to yell at, i.e. me, her poetry mom, who in no way wanted her daughter. And I've had my share of mommies saying snarky things to me on the same subject because they had no idea how much work children are, even though they're adorable. But being the oldest in a big family, I knew. So that too was a piece of luck, though when I was changing my little brother's diaper, it didn't really look like it. But that's the thing about Lady Luck. She can show up dressed in rags, smoking a corncob pipe, and then reappear 20 years later looking like Glinda in The Wizard of Oz. It being a matter of translating your own life to yourself, which is what I'm doing every day, interpreting my own language into an English that drives a spear into my heart. And I'll tell you who's lucky. Everybody and nobody in the same milkshake. You put in a scoop of chocolate, a scoop of raspberry dishwater sorbet, a squirt of kerosene, and lo and behold, there's a cherry. And what can you do but put it on top?
Yeah, great poem. I love that ending too. That was an Ode to Luck, or Ode on Luck, I should say, by Barbara Hamby from the forthcoming book, yet to be named. Maybe we can have some suggestions in the comments.
Yeah, really. I'll take suggestions.
Take
I
them.
need them. I need them.
So we hear, in that poem, your style, which is very maximalist in like where you go, moving all over the place, and also very fast. Which that fast voice, sort of breathlessness, it becomes a heart of so many of the poems that you write. Where did that style come from? Is that something that you always wrote? Did you gravitate toward that for a certain reason? How did that come to be?
Well, I think it comes from Walt Whitman and Frank O'Hara. You know, two of my daddies. I just love their work. I love Emily Dickinson too, but I don't really write too many Dickinson poems. But Walt Whitman is just a motor mouth, and I just loved him from the very beginning. So I think that's maybe where it comes from. And also too, one of the things I really love to do, and I didn't do it in Ode on Luck, is I love to write a long poem in just one sentence, just to keep that kind of momentum going, because one of the things I think I like to do is give a sense of my own consciousness. It's how you jump from one thing to another, and I don't think anybody's mind is very focused. I mean, it's an artistic rendering of it, because nobody would really be interested in how boring my mind really is. So you're trying to put a good spin on it, but I really my mind is always jumping around, and so I try to give a sense of that. And David, my husband, David Kirby, has a great bon mot. He says that poetry is the deliberate transformed by the accidental. And so you start with an image or a set, an idea, a set of words. And then I just love to let it go and see where my mind takes me.
Yeah, well, they're really fun to read for that reason. And you can really see, too, one of the things we talk about, people are always asking about line breaks and how long the lines are and what it means and things. And I'm always explaining that, the longer lines make you read faster because it's more like prose, and they sort of pull you along, and shorter lines make you focus on the sounds of words. And you can really see that in your poems. I was pretty sure you'd read the poems like they are in my head, but I wasn't completely sure. But but that's how they come across, and then that's how you read them, too, which is just great to hear. And I just love that pace of it. It's almost like, so many things are happening that like you almost can't keep up with the visuals. And then and so there's this like really cool effect of like always running to catch a train or something as you read your poems, and it's really cool to hear you do that. Let's hear another one. The next up is Box Ode.
Box Ode. This is one that it is in my least favorite form, which is the quatrain. And because I always said before I wrote this one, who would want to put a poem in a box? And yet here I am, and I thought, oh, it's got to be in quatrains because it's called Box Ode. But this is really the beginning of the poem is where it's started. A friend told me told a little story, and that started me thinking about different kinds of things. So here it is, Box Ode. Sarah is bartending at Waterworks, a local tiki bar, and tells us about the box a colleague has with all the creepy notes men have slipped her. And I think most women have a box like this. And if you're lucky, it's not your body. And I think of what my own box might contain. Certainly the letter from the law professor's wife, the one she wrote when he asked me out. And I said, "You're married?" And he said, "We have an open marriage." And I thought, sure you do. So I said I'd have lunch with him if his wife wrote me and said it was okay. And I thought that would be the end of it. But he brought the note to the restaurant where I worked, and I went out with him. But it was so boring that even he knew it was a stupid idea. How much she must have wanted to get rid of him. And years later, I met her again at a dinner party with a new husband, and she didn't remember me, but I placed her around 3 a.m. My box would have all the poems and drawings that men have tried to ply me with, though most of them were pretty romantic. But what is romance but a trick on yourself, though a beautiful one, a lot of work to keep going and worth it when you're deep in the tunnels of your body, which lead to your heart box with all its swelling crescendos and arias of accordion classics, and your brain box, full of Hamlet and refrigerator warranties, and your cunt box with its bongo drums and traffic sirens. And I love to think of Whitman's box of notes for Song of Myself, all the little pieces floating like birds over the open sea of America before they were anything near a typeset page or Pandora's box, which only became hers when she opened it and let loose the flies of smallpox on an unsuspecting world, the locusts of polio, the invisible bubonic future that has just knocked on our door, everyone's body a box of cells wanting to break free of its suit of skin.
And that was a Boxode, once again, from the forthcoming book by Barbara Hamby, and that's the one that's in the summer issue of Rattle. So for a poem like that, I'm really curious about your process, because it feels like, you said that it's sort of a performance of that stream of consciousness, but how much of it is a performance? How much you sort of want to imagine that this is just what's popping up in your head, like as you're coming through a line, the next image is there, and you're sort of letting whatever's, popping up in your head guide you through the poem. Is that what the process is like, or is it a slower, deliberate process that you turn into this form?
Well, I think that, as you, become fixed in kind of your facility, you have your process and you trust it more. And I have to say that, I just got back from a month in Italy, and it was really a writer's workshop. David and I got up every morning and worked all morning, both on our own new books. And I got ready for it. I had all of these, what he calls poem kits, but I just call, poems, possible poems. And I had about 14 of them. And I ended up writing 11, and I think about 8 of them are going to be in my new book. So it was really a fantastic month. But that's what I did. It was, I had these ideas, like, there's one that every day, every time I drive to work, I pass this church, the True Fellowship Holiness Tabernacle. And it's kind of a rundown church, but it has an empty lot next to it that has wildflowers in it, and it's beautiful. And so I thought, that would be a great ode to empty lots. And I didn't know where it was going to take me. And so when I was in Italy, I started writing about that lot. And then I thought, there's a barbecue place next to it. And every Friday they have all of these food trucks come in, and they have bands and they play the bands. And so, once I had my first line, which is, to have a mind like the empty lot at the True Fellowship Holiness Church. And then there was the bar. Then I just thought, and your mind could have the barbecue joint, and it could have the party that's every Friday night. And then I started thinking about probably they're speaking in tongues at that church and what that meant. And I was surprised at where the poem took me. Mm-hmm. It was really. It happened in the moment, as David says. So I had my deliberate, which was the image of the empty lot, but then I didn't know where it was going to go. I was surprised. Mm-hmm. And I think that when you're surprised, then the reader's surprised too. Yeah. Which is lovely.
Do you always start with the ode? And now that you're writing odes, is it always an ode to something that's the first thing that comes to mind and triggers the poem? Because it feels to me like maybe a great sort of never-ending prompt to always know you're going to write an ode, and then you see things and you can say an ode to that, and then you get the gears going and the poem starts flowing. Is it always start with the ode, or later sometimes do you realize, this should be an ode to that? Or
sometimes I'll elaborate on the title a little bit, but no. I start with what I'm going to write about, and then see where it takes me. And it's sometimes it takes me to boring places, and those are the ones that aren't going to be in the book. And but when it's working, then I'm happy.
Yeah.
And it feels good, and you're in the zone when you're writing. And it's, I'm hoping that this is my last book of odes. I don't know. I always try to break away from these, it's not really a form, it's more a stance. But, my fourth book, All Night Lingo Tango, was very formal. And I have a poem from that book called Mambo Cadillac. And when I finished that book, I thought, oh man, I love what I can do here, but I can see I'm painting myself into a corner, and I had to, just let it go. And that was really hard to start writing free verse poems again.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I know that a lot of people ask when I go to readings, why don't poems rhyme anymore? And I said, oh, I've got a poem for you. Uh, and this, so maybe what I'll do is read the poem Mambo Cadillac, which is I have to give a shout out to the Russian American poet Joseph Brodsky. They kicked him out of Russia, and then he won the Nobel Prize, but he was an American citizen by then, so we got the credit for him. And but he has a beautiful, funny, crazy poem in his book To Urania, which I just love. It's called 20 Sonnets on Mary Queen of Scots. And one of the things that you hear are, I've heard over and over again, that English is not a good language for rhyming because we don't have those feminine endings to our words. And so, but Joseph Brodsky translated his own poem from Russian into English and showed this American poet what English could do. And how I mean, his rhymes are just unbelievable. So he, really what he said is, you American poets are wrong. Your language or your English poets are wrong. English is a great rhyming language. And so one of his sonnets has a monorhyme, which is the same rhyme. And so in this poem, Mambo Cadillac, I have only one end rhyme. And if we want to talk about process, I just had all of the words in a list. And I started out with my first line and then just would pick when I needed at the end rhyme, I would just pick it up from my list that I had. So it was a huge, really a poem that came from the moment. So I was completely unplanned. And it was, then there's also too a secondary rhyme that came up in the middle of the poem. So it's really, I had a lot of fun writing this book.
Yeah, it seems fun. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it is. It was really fun. And let me say this is that it was totally a fiasco at first. I couldn't do it. But I kept trying, and then suddenly everything clicked. And it was worth all of the pain and agony that I went through of, abject failure. So let me see if I can find that one. Oh yeah, Mambo Cadillac. Drive me to the edge in your Mambo Cadillac. Turn left at the graveyard and gas that baby, the black night ringing with its holy roller scream. I'll clock you on the highway at 3 a.m., brother. Amen. Smack the road as hard as we can, because I'm going to crack the world in two, make a hoodoo soup with chicken necks, a gumbo with plutonium roux, a little snack before the dirt and jalapeno stew that will shuck the skin right off your slinky hips, mister. I'm not stuck in a middle-class prison with someone I hate. Sack of blues. Put on your high wire shoes, Mr. Wright, and stick with me. I'm going nowhere fast, the burlesque queen of this dim scene. I want to feel the wind, the Glock in my mouth, going south down by the riverside, shock of the view. Take me to Shingles Fried Chicken Shack in your Mambo Cadillac. I was gone, but I'm back for good this time. I've taken a shine to daylight. Crank up that radio, baby. Put on some dance music and shake your moneymaker, honey. Rev it up to Mach 2. I'm talking to you, Mr. Magoo. Sit up and check out that blonde with the leopard print tattoo. Oh, she'll lick the sugar right off your donut and bill you to speak French while she do the do. Parlez-vous français? Okay, pick me up tonight at 10 in your Mambo Cadillac, because we got a date with the devil. So fill the tank with high octane rhythm and blues, sugarcane and shark bait too. We got some miles to cover, me and you. Think Chile, Argentina, Peru. Take some time off work. We're going to be gone a lot longer than a week or two. Is this D-Day or Waterloo? White or black? It's up to you. We'll be in Mexico tonight. Pack a razor, pack some glue. Things fall apart off the track. And that's where we'll be, baby, in your Mambo Cadillac, because you're looking for love, but I'm looking for a wreck.
Yeah, that's a great poem. That's a Mambo Cadillac. Such a fun read. And speaking of fun, you co-edited the anthology Seriously Funny, and that's something that I think about a lot. There's an essay which I sort of misremember and blow up into more than it says about it's by Kay Ryan that was in poetry about humor in poetry. And she makes this in just this one little sentence. She makes the point that the ah in a poetry reading is so similar to the ha of like a comedy club. There's some kind of spontaneous release of like there's a physicality to it. There's that sense of something that we can't really control, that the language is unlocking. So I'm curious about your thoughts on humor in poetry. I mean, that's a funny poem, and a lot of your work does have a lot of humor in it. And then, having gone through and trying to find funny poems. At the same time, though, we tried to do a humor issue of Rattle, and it was really hard to fill because things on the page, it's really hard to get the humor across. It's not like being at a comedy club because you don't have all the cadence and the facial expression and the body language to work on and the timing. You have to sort of build that into the poem somehow. So what are your thoughts on how to get humor into poetry, and what is that connection between the sigh and the laugh?
Well, it's interesting. Before we put together the anthology, there's a previous anthology called Stand Up Poetry, and it's poems that work kind of like stand-up comedy. Charles Harper Webb was the editor, and he's a California guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've had him on the Rattlecast. He was on.
He's great.
Early on. Yeah.
I know that he asked me to be in his anthology, and I thought, I'm not really that funny. I'm not a funny person. I grew up in a family of comics. I mean, and I was always, not the funny one. But poetry allows me sometimes to actually be funny, which I kind of, I love it. And when I do a reading, I tend to read those stand-up poems more than the more serious poems. Mm-hmm. So. I don't know. I think that Kay's onto something there. It's that ah and the ha are, and I have to say, when I'm at a reading and people laugh at my poems, I just love it. It's just, you feel like you're really connecting when you hear that laughter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's one thing that, at readings, that it's a lot easier to be, funny at readings because you have that sort of sense of, nobody knows what's coming. So there's like sort of built-in tension. And then to break that tension is so fun. So mixing in fun poems, I think is such an important part of making a reading entertaining. Is there anything you do differently if you're sort of performing a funnier poem at a reading, or do you just let the words and the pace go in the way you normally would?
I kind of let it go. Sometimes what I try to do is set it up so that, as you said, things happen so quickly in my poems that sometimes, you feel like you're running. And so sometimes I like to set them up so that, people have an orientation, that in the audience have an orientation about what's coming up. But it doesn't ruin it, I don't think, at all. It just, you go, oh yeah, I know where I am here, and I really, I always feel like a missionary for poetry. I grew up in a very religious family, and so I've still got some of those, kinks. But I feel like I want people to love poetry as much as I do. And the biggest thrill for me is to have somebody come up after a reading and say, I didn't want to come. My girlfriend made me. And but I didn't know poetry could be like this. And I feel like, yes. And I said, yes, poetry can be like this. It's a joy. I really, I believe.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's so clear that you have so much fun writing these poems because there's just so much come out from them and with that energy. We talked about the rhyme in Mambo Cadillac and and the difference between romance languages where they have the feminine endings that rhyme. And I always thought that because English, maybe it's like a bias of mine, but I always thought that because English has such variety, that's the really unique thing because English was conquered so many times, and there's the French influence and the Nordic and the Anglo. There's so many sounds. And we have like different words for everything, the high and the low and the German. And, and so it makes it for really fun rhyming play. Whereas in other languages, it's sort of too easy almost. Do you think that might be that?
Well, I think that you've got to give your permission. I know one of the things Brodsky did in his poem is he rhymed the French word chic with eine kleine Nachtmusik. And I thought, okay, it set me free. I thought, Okay, I can, anything is, yeah, a poem can have, any kind of rhyme in it. And so, yeah, yeah, I think English is a great language for rhyming. And I don't do end rhymes so much anymore, but sometimes it just comes over me. And in Holoholo, there's a poem that is not only is it in rhyming couplets, but it's an ABCdarian too, which is another one of my loves
Mm-hmm.
that I've tried to break up with it, but I can't help but write them. In fact, there are two in my new book, and so far, we'll see.
You mentioned going back to free verse. Was that hard for you? I find, in every regard, there's a way you sort of like get addicted to rhyming. And if you start writing right, it's like you start rhyming too much and it almost gets in the way of the poem because you're like so drawn to the rhyme. And even reading submissions as an editor, like if there's a really good rhyming poem, I go to the next submission that's free verse and it's almost like hard to read. I have to like get up and walk around the house to make sure I can get that rhyming voice and the meter out of my head. Was it hard for you to get rid of that to get back to free verse?
Oh yeah, it was really hard. However, when it started clicking, I realized that my voice was a lot more complex,
Mm-hmm.
um, just sonically, than it had been before. Like I was I wasn't doing end rhymes but I had a lot of um, assonance, like internal um, vowel rhymes that I couldn't, that really were pleasing to the ear in a way that my poems they were more prosy before that.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really a good thing for me to do, and a ton of fun and really, really hard.
Yeah.
I always tell my students that if you want to do something, just tell your brain it really wants to please you. And it'll try hard to help you do what you want to do. But it may take time, but you have to stick with it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what happened with me. And the book before All Night Lingo Tango, which is all formal poems, was called Babel. And I was trying to do that all through Babel and failing. And what I would do when the rhymes wouldn't work out, or what happens, you force the rhymes are forcing the poem in a certain direction.
Mm-hmm.
And it just doesn't work. So what I have to do is pull the poem apart and make it a free verse poem. And then suddenly at the end of that book, I started being able to do the end rhymes. And also too, I was writing in 13 syllable lines too. So
Mm-hmm.
I was making it extra hard for myself.
Yeah, that would be. But I always think of there's a Vonnegut novel where there's a painter, and he does this covers the wall with a certain kind of like latex paint from like Walmart or something. I don't know which store it is, but that's all his paintings are. And at the very end of the book, you realize that he has these intricate murals underneath, hidden beneath. And he says like I couldn't paint the plain color paintings unless I knew how to paint the mural underneath. And there's kind of a way that poetry goes too, like learning. I try to encourage everybody to learn to write, even if you're not going to. Writing with verse and rhyme just brings such life to your free verse poems. I mean, it's free verse, but it's still verse, and so having that music is still valuable.
And I always like to think about one of the reasons why I wanted to write formal poems is that a lot of formal verse was, just dead. It was, just kind of boring. And what I wanted to do was to write and that's true of free verse poems too. I'm not picking on formal poets, but I wanted to write a poem that had what the Italians call sprezzatura, to do something really hard and make it look easy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like Mambo Cadillac does that. It's some 13 syllable lines and the same end rhyme, but I feel like it has that kind of flow and rhythm that really I hope it looks easy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I always it does. I mean, to think that that's 13 syllables is really hard to imagine. And I always had trouble with syllabic poetry because I can't hear it. And A.E. Stallings was on a year or two ago, and she writes in syllabics a lot, and she explained that it's about sort of forcing you to make decisions that you wouldn't, and like making you think in a different way, and forcing you outside the box that you put yourself in. That's what makes she loves it. So it's sort of an artificial boundary that makes your brain open up. And I think that's is that how it works for you when you're doing those?
Yeah, it does. And now I don't even count syllables anymore. It's funny. I came to syllabics because when my first book came out, it had a review, and the reviewer said she works in a 12-syllable line. And I thought, I do. And then I started counting the syllables, and I thought, shoot, yeah. I mean, so it was like something
Oh, wow.
that I was doing that I was unaware of, a rhythmical, I'd like a long, as you said, a fast line. A long line is a fast line, and I really love that. And so then I thought, okay, well, if I'm doing this, let me just try, see what happens when I try to do it. And but again, it's like the rhyme. When you ask your brain to do something, pretty soon I was just writing in 13-syllable lines, 12-syllable lines, 13-syllable lines. I didn't even have to try. It was my brain said, okay, I can do this. I know what she wants me to do. And so it was working with me instead of against me.
Yeah, that's so fascinating to think of, like, somewhere deep in your brain, there's like a little, program that's counting while you're not counting, and it knows.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Well, it's like when I do yoga. I mean, when you're doing a long pose, I start counting. Like when I'm doing my shoulder stand, if I want to do a 5-minute shoulder stand, then I start counting, and then my mind just starts wandering. But that count is always there. I go back to it, 180, 181. But so yeah, the brain is capable of so much. And, most people just don't ask it to do as much as it can do. And so I think it kind of gets a thrill out of being asked to do something really difficult.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I do a little game with myself where I try to guess the time and just see how close to the minute I am. And it's surprising how accurate, how often you're just like, bam, it's 5:53, and it's, boop. So, which it is. So, well, let's hear another poem. I think I want to ask you something else, but let's do another poem because we haven't done a poem in a while.
Okay, let's see. What do I want? Oh, this is one from Holoholo that I think I've people have said that they liked. It's Ode to My Younger Self. So, you were beautiful and stupid, though you thought you were so smart. And in a way you were, because you loved poetry and Beethoven and apples. But why did it take you so long to learn to drink coffee and eat breakfast? And those boyfriends, oh well, you were young and experimenting with everything: drugs, love, dancing at lesbian bars, meditating for a month at a Buddhist retreat, taking the train from Kansas City to New York, and staying with a friend whose Buddhist master told her that you had bad vibes and not to stay in the same apartment with you. The same guy who gave her a special stone to put in her vagina to cure the bad vibes there. Though she wasn't the weirdest friend you had, because that would have had to be Marianne, who, when I see her around town now and she's skinny, I know she's not taking her meds, and that tiger walk stalk of hers will end up badly for me in the jungle of her mind. So I try not to make eye contact, because more than anything, I don't want to put on my combat boots and wade into her psychodrama. And when I see young women walking down the street with that lost look in their eyes, I want to say to them, don't despair, beautiful young women. You'll find yourself, and one day you'll wake up and realize you were always that person. But maybe I'm wrong. Because some women marry a guy who looks like a prince and end up in a morgue or a refuge house, or hanging themselves from the chandelier in their rented rooms. Time can be dangerous. So read Middlemarch, young women, because George Eliot can do your thinking for you until you get your own mind organized. Or Dostoevsky and Charlotte Bronte, who helped me navigate the utter stupidity of my early 20s. And Keats and Garcia Lorca. So in a sense, my younger self, you chose your friends well, though they were all in books. And Thomas Hardy was one of your best boyfriends ever, wasn't he? Because you spotted your Gabriel Oak from across the room and were not pulled in by a Sergeant Frank Troy. And Jane Austen, she taught you how to hold out for what you really wanted. And Virginia Woolf, she showed you how to be a woman and a man in the same body through time. And the Song of Solomon told you that love could be poetry. So thank you for staying up all night reading and not going out to bars. And I really appreciate that dance class you took 3 days a week, all through your 30s. And after that, the yoga. I'm feeling fit right now, and I know I have you to thank. And those 11 years as a vegetarian, you really took care of my heart.
Yeah, great ending. And the way the fast pace, just the slow down at the end there. Every time you slow down, it stands out so much and so strongly because of the pace. It's a really cool way that functions. That you got into how you became a poet or why in that poem. So I'm wondering, talking about all the amazing things the mind can do, and the idea of Holoholo, which I love, that concept is a metaphor for poetry, of going on a walk and not knowing where you're going and just seeing what comes up. It's always felt to me that poets are sort of like astronauts into our own minds. Like we sit down and blast off and, discover some new planet we didn't know was there, because it's like there's no end to the universe that's inside. And was it always that drew you to poetry, or did you develop that along the way? Because you seem to be doing that very clearly, given your style and the way that you go about writing poems, that you're exploring. Is that always about the exploring, or is that something you discovered?
Well, I remember when I first wrote a poem that went all over the place, and also too went on to a couple of pages. I thought, oh my God, this is really what I want to do. And, I write fiction too. So I think that I'm not afraid of the narrative line or the sentence. The sentence and the line are both really important to me. But, I just remember falling in love with poetry at a very early age. I would read poems. My parents had this set of encyclopedias for children. And I remember reading the stories in that, it's like maybe a 10 volume. Oh, it was a 10 volume encyclopedia. But I would read the poems and I would love the poems. And my first poem I wrote when I was in the second grade, and my teacher was really, I get a beautiful teacher, and she was just, she was smitten by my writing. And, I was writing with a big pencil too. I mean, it wasn't sophisticated at all. And she told my mother, she said, Barbara has a really good imagination. You need to encourage that. And so she always did. Anything I wanted to do, she would say, okay. And she was a very religious woman. And it was really sad for my brothers and sisters too, because they got busted for lying, but I could lie with impunity because it was imagination in my mother's mind. So, so from a very early age, so that was maybe 7 or 8, I saw what the written word could do. It was powerful. And I published my first story in my school newspaper when I was in the 3rd grade, and I'd walk down the hall and 6th graders would stop me and say, man, I loved your story. And I thought, wow, this is great. I love this, So, it's just, but I'm a graphomaniac. I love to write. In fact, I remember before I learned to read or write, I would fill pages with just cursive scrawl, getting my hand ready for writing before I could even do it.
Yeah, it's amazing that feedback loop, that we like what we're good at, so we get better at it, and so we like it, so we get better at it, and it's cool to see that play out from an early age, like, Michael Jordan shooting the basketball hoops all day in his driveway, so, it just...
Or Jimi Hendrix playing the guitar, while he was watching TV.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. It's just, it's cool how, evolution works. Who would have thought? Let's do 2 more poems. We'll do 1 poem, and then we'll do kind of a quicker question section, and then the last poem.
Okay, let's see. Why don't I read? I've been thinking about let's see, loss a lot, because as you get older, you lose people, not just through death, but sometimes you think a friend who's going to be with you your whole life, that you just don't connect anymore. And one of the and also too about anger. I've been thinking, I just read this great quote by James Baldwin, which it's, I I imagine one of the reasons people cling to their hate so stubbornly is because they sense once hate is gone, they will be forced to deal with their pain. And I thought, oh, wow, that is so good. And so this is a poem about my brother, who I've kind of was really close to at one time. And I haven't spoken to him in a long time because his anger was just too hard to bear. So this is called Ode on Anger, the Dalai Lama, and Eliot's Red Boots. I get this story secondhand because since I'm not speaking to my brother, who can be charming until he isn't, which always happens. And his main beef against me seems to be that I'm older, which I can't see any way of changing except by sorcery or a rift in the time-space continuum. But my sister calls me with a report every time he checks in. And the latest is that he finds a photo of the Dalai Lama as a boy, which he places by his bed, only he doesn't know it's the Dalai Lama, who comes to him in a dream and tells my brother that he has to let go of his anger, to which he replies, I don't want to. I love my anger. And the Dalai Lama says, it's not doing you or anyone else any good. And when my brother wakes up, he calls my sister and tells her that he's had this epiphany, though we've been telling him the same thing for years. But I suppose a universal spiritual leader carries more weight than your stupid sisters who are always trying to boss you around and made good grades and went to college, la-di-da. But I think about my brother's son when he was 4, a beautiful boy who I loved to babysit. And we were going somewhere one day and I told him, honey, put on your shoes. And my father had given him some red cowboy boots, which he loved. So I left him putting them on. And when I returned, he had them on the wrong feet. So I said, darling, you have them on the wrong feet. And he replied, I like them that way. But in a few minutes, he hobbled to another room and came back with the boots on the right feet. And we said nothing more about them. And I guess that's what I wish would happen with my brother's anger, though he might have to go to Mars and come back to offload that particular cargo. Because aren't we more like pack mules than gods most days, picking our way across the desert or up a mountain path with avalanches, and the heaviest loads are our grudges and fears, while poetry and beauty rest on our shoulders like fairy wings, or one of those pastries in a shop window in Paris, almost too beautiful to eat, but eat it we do, with its frosting of butter and sugar and eggs.
Yeah, another great poem. That was Ode on Anger, the Dalai Lama, and Elliot Reed's Red Boots. Yeah, great title too. What is there between an ode to and an ode on?
Well, I think that ideally they should be when it's on something, you're not addressing it directly, but when it's to, it's a direct address.
Gotcha.
Like I'm still working on it, but when we were in Italy, I finished an ode to the radio, and it's a direct address to the radio.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's interesting. So I meant to ask or say before, if anyone has any questions for Barbara, leave them in the chat windows, either on YouTube or Facebook, and I will pass them along. We did have one question early on, but you got to be quick because I should have said that earlier. So add your questions here either way. But Cindy Gore wanted to know, is there a topic you want to write about, yet worry it's cliched? Is that a cliche is something that you do you worry about?
No, I don't worry about that. As a matter of fact, sometimes I just embrace them because in Holoholo, there's a poem about all of the cliches my mother used to use that I just miss so much. Like she would sometimes I'd be spinning a story and she would just look at me and say, I can read you like a book. And I thought, oh, wow, what book, which book is that,
Mm-hmm.
and, so I don't know. And, God, if you think about songwriters, sometimes they'll take the most cliched phrase and make a beautiful song out of it. Like Bob Dylan's A Simple Twist of Fate. I mean, that's a cliche, but what a beautiful song he made out of it. And I know that the Beatles did the same thing too. So I don't know. No, it's not something I really worry about. I mean, we're always going to write about love, aren't we?
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of worries, that last poem's about your brother. Do you worry about anything you publish being too personal for other people, or do you just feel like it's your story and you tell whatever? Do you ever hold back?
Yeah, sometimes, especially if it's going to be embarrassing to me, but I don't care with him. In fact, as a matter of fact, I think that he would really like it if he knew that I was writing a poem about him. So, yeah.
That's
A little
funny.
bit of a narcissist, so so I think that he would be very flattered, and most of the time people are. And it's funny, I've had students who've been really worried because they about their parents reading their poems. And I said, don't worry about it. They're going to love it. They're going to, you've got a book out. This is every parent's dream. For their child to have a place in the world, not living in their basement smoking pot. So it's, I think that, and so far I've been right.
Yeah, I think a lot of times too that if somebody's going to be upset by something like a poem, then there's already something going on that's upsetting, and it's really not the poem. So it's kind of like, what difference does it make if they have issues and they're going to be upset by things? They'll be upset by a poem. So maybe it just doesn't make a difference.
Yeah, I have a student now who's got a wonderful book, and her best poems, her funniest poems are about her stepmother. And she says, I've got to, I can't publish this until she dies. And I said, forget it. You're going to make her so happy. She's going to love them.
Well, I don't know. I don't know if I'd be a little worried about that myself, but we'll. Another thing that I've noticed a lot is you have a lot of cultural references in your poems, and a lot of sort of things that are fixing it in time, which is something I've always noticed as sort of an American type thing. I always thought of it that way anyway. And sort of the European writers and South American writers sort of have a more timeless style. And, things like referencing ZZ Top, which I think was in an earlier poem, and things like that are something that sort of makes it feel very tangible, but also like fleeting in a way. Is that something that you think about, or do you just let what comes out come out?
Well, one of the things that I'm doing as a teacher is trying to convince my students that poetry started at the beginning of writing. And so I start with the Sumerian princess Enheduanna and then go on to the Hebrew poets. And, and the Greek poets, the Greek poet Pindar has a lot of references that we don't know anymore, but it doesn't make his poetry any less beautiful. And you think about a lot of references that we hold dear now are going to be gone in 100 years. And you just have to kind of learn to live with that and not to worry too much about it, I think. Mm-hmm. I read something recently. It said in 1,000,000 years, the only thing we'll recognize is laughter and mathematics.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's probably true.
So, no, I don't worry about it. I embrace my present moment.
Yeah, well, that's a great way to be. I think that's the reason why poetry is so good for like mental health, because it helps you do that. So somebody asked, and maybe it's a fan of the fiction, Brian Buck asks, is there still a Hawaii novel in the works?
Yeah, I've got it. I can't place it anywhere, but it's all written. And it's been 600 pages. It's been 500 pages. It's been it's 350 now. So I don't know, and I've got a new book of stories almost ready to go too. So I'm working on the last story. So
given that you write both, prolifically, really, what do you think the difference between poetry and prose is? Is there a definition? Because there are those gray areas, the flash fiction, the prose poetry. Is there something on a deeper level than just, what the poet calls it or what we label it that makes something a poem versus not a poem?
Well, I always used to answer that question with, it comes from a different place. And then I heard Margaret Atwood speak one time, and she said, somebody asked her the same question. And she said, well, they said, which do you like better, poetry or prose? And she said, well, when I'm writing poetry, I like it better. And when I'm writing prose, I like it better. But then she got herself under control, and she said, she said that her brother was a neurologist, and when the brain is mapped, with little electrodes, where poetry takes place is close to where music takes place. And where fiction takes place is when it's being written is where conversation takes place. And so I started thinking of it on a continuum. So with music on one end and conversation on the other, and then moving towards, the Rubicon of prose poetry and shorts.
Mm-hmm.
And so it really frees my students, and it certainly frees me. You don't have to, write the same thing all the time. David's poems are very narrative, and mine are kind of in between lyric and narrative, I think. But it's kind of a beautiful thing.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear about the brain. I'd never heard that before. And what I think of it, which fits perfectly with that, is that it's poetry is more in the body, and prose is more in the mind and the mind's eye. And so it's sort of the imagination versus the actual physical movement of your body and your heartbeat and things like that they're bodily. And then of course it's a continuum, so like it's some of each in both, but it's where it points to more than the other. So that's really interesting to hear about the music. Let's close up with one last poem.
Okay, let's see. Do you want Elvis and Tolstoy Save the World or Ode to Killing Sadness?
Oh, they both sound great. Whichever you prefer.
Okay, I'll end with Elvis and Tolstoy Save the World, and this came from a trip. When I got the Guggenheim Fellowship, I went on the Trans-Siberian Railroad from St. Petersburg to Beijing, and one of the places I visited was Elvis's estate, Yasnaya Polanya, in Russia. And then the next summer, David and I went to Memphis and visited Graceland. And when I was at Graceland, I thought, wow, this is a lot like Tolstoy's house. And so that's when this poem was born. Elvis and Tolstoy Saved the World. I'm standing in line waiting for the bus to take me across the street to Graceland when Tolstoy shows up with his white beard and peasant's garb, and I smell him before I see him because, let's face it, Min's Speedstick was not big at Yasnaya Polanya, but I recognize him right away, those big ears and the beard like one of the guys in ZZ Top, and I say, Lev Nikolaevich, what are you doing here? And he gives me this mix of a stink eye and what are you doing later, and says, I need to talk to Elvis. And I'm thinking, Tolstoy, let's see, I lost my place there. Lev Nikolaevich, what are you doing here? And he gives us this mix of a stink eye and what are you doing later, and says, I need to talk to Elvis. And I'm thinking, Tolstoy looked at my boobs, and what's Tolstoy want to say to Elvis at the same moment? And if one more supernatural thing happens, my brain might explode. But we just get on the bus, sit down, and put on our headphones. But I can't stop thinking about how much Elvis and Tolstoy have in common, as in hundreds of people standing in line to tour their houses. And Tolstoy had a favorite daughter, Alexandra, and Chernoff and all of his celibate followers. And Elvis had Lisa Marie and the Memphis Mafia. And there were Priscilla and Sonia, both driven mad by the great one's sexual inhibitions. So when we arrive at Graceland, which contrary to my expectations is not cheesy, but a middle-class family home, and the guides tell us to go through the house at our own pace, but not to go upstairs, though that doesn't stop Tolstoy, who heads right up. And since no one says anything to him, I follow along in his wake, and he goes to Elvis's bedroom without knocking or anything. And there's Elvis lying on the bed, but the young Elvis with his sad eyes, and Tolstoy says, Elvis, quit moping around. We have work to do. And I'm standing over by the closet trying to visualize an Elvis Tolstoy project. But Elvis tells Tolstoy he can't help him. I'm sad, he says. My mama's dead, and she's the only one who really loved me. My mother just died too, I say. And Elvis's head jerks up. Who's she? He asked Tolstoy, who shakes his head. I don't know, some groupie. Forget her. We have to save the world. What's wrong with it? Elvis says. What's wrong with it? Tolstoy's head explodes and then comes right back together again like some crazy cat cartoon, which gets Elvis's attention. How long since you've been outside, says Tolstoy. I've been dead, says Elvis. But Tolstoy pulls him out of the bed. That's no excuse. And I'm thinking groupie. Black Sabbath has groupies, but Tolstoy. And if I were going to be a groupie, I'd be following Chekhov around because he's my idea of a guy I'd like to spend time with. But here I am with Tolstoy and Elvis, and both are as crazy as rats in a coffee can. But for dead guys, they're moving fast. And I make a note to amp up my morning walk because I'm huffing as Tolstoy shoves Elvis into the pink Cadillac, and I barely make it into the back seat because Lev Nikolaevich is gunning the engine heading south on Highway 61 to Natchez and New Orleans, because as everyone knows, that's where the world almost ended on August 29th, 2005, when Katrina hit the Gulf Coast like an apocalyptic medieval shitstorm. And when I look at my watch, the hands are moving backwards fast. The Cadillac speedometer is moving past 80, 100, and we take off into the clouds, which are gray as a Confederate uniform, then black. And Tolstoy says, we have to blast Katrina with our combined mojo, Elvis, or New Orleans will be sucked into the center of the earth. And Elvis says, Jesus Christ. And Tolstoy says, no, man, it's just you and me. And Elvis jerks his head backwards and says, who's she again? And Tolstoy shakes his head and looks into the rear view mirror. She's going to write the poem. Woo!
Yeah, so I muted myself to cough, but yeah, just take a bow because those were great poems, and wonderful to hear you read and be a guest today. It was just really fun talking to you and getting to hear your poems in your voice, which is so fun to listen to and entertaining. I appreciate it.
Thanks so very much, and thanks for doing Rattle too. What a treat every morning to wake up to a poem.
Oh, thanks. Well, it's a treat for me too, so I'm glad you feel that way. Thanks, Barbara. We'll have you again sometime soon.
Okay.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Yep, that was Barbara Hamby once again with poems from Holoholo is her most recent book that you can find. Her forthcoming book was there as well. You can find all of Barbara's work at barbarahamby.com. That's Barbara, Hamby.com. So find that. Now we're going to move on to the open lines. And the open lines work like they always do. I'll put this on screen right now. First, email your poem to openmic, that's openmic at rattle.com. That way I can show them on the screen as I was showing Barbara's poems earlier. Email them right now to openmic@rattle.com. And then, only if you're sharing poems, only if you want to participate in that way, find the Zoom link and join this Zoom that we've been on. I will paste it into the chat windows, both on Facebook and YouTube. You can read anything you want. You can read prompt poems. You can read poems about current events. You can read poems you published recently, that you wrote recently. Whatever you want to share is welcome. Probably one poem each. And here we go. Join me when you can. But if you'd like to just sit and enjoy more poetry, sit right where you are, and the stream will continue on Facebook and YouTube, so you don't have to go anywhere unless you want to share poems. So go ahead and do that, and I'll be right back with more poetry. And we're back. Thanks for your patience. Like I said, feel free to share any poems that you would like, but we do have a prompt. And the prompt this week was right here, the very simple one. It was to, there we go. It was to write a poem entitled Happiness. That's it. Just a poem with happiness. You can do everything you want. Take that anywhere it leads you. I decided to write a short little poem. I haven't done that in a while. And here is my prompt poem, Happiness. So they're all going to be called Happiness, so no surprises there. But this is Happiness. Happiness is a field we all day cut in the ryegrass, the old mower's coughing chorus, and the ancient clay we carried for a mound, past the perfect field, our perfect town laid out before us. That was my Happiness poem. A little short one. Now let's see what you have. And we have, we'll probably do like a 2-page max today, I think. We'll have 10 poets on the line. We will go in the order they appear on my screen. And first up is Katie Dozier.
Hey, Tim, how are you?
Hey, Katie, I'm great. How are you?
I love that interview because Barbara Hamby was my main poetry professor at Florida State. So I owe a lot of everything I learned from poetry to her. So it was really wonderful to watch that interview.
Yes, so I've heard. And did you fulfill any hopes for secrets being revealed or anything like that you always wondered when you were a student?
You know, I feel like I should have asked her the question you did about the difference on an ode to or an ode on. And probably at some point I did, but I had forgotten that. So it's glad that you clarified that. Because I feel like I should have known, especially because I've read like every poem of hers I can get my hands on. And I think the way she taught us odes was so useful for writing every kind of poetry, because it just takes an appreciation of a simple thing and really like it forces you to really examine it. So it was really instrumental in how I unfolded as writing a poet.
Mm-hmm. And it does feel too like if you write odes, you can never have a writer's block, because you can always write an ode to anything you want, and then just get you going and get the gears working in the old brain. So anyway, what do you have? Speaking of prompts, what do you have for us this week? You have Happiness, I see.
I have Happiness. It is called Happiness. And it's funny because had it not been dictated that it had to be called literally just Happiness, it may have been, ode on as opposed to, ode to actually, because of how it's written, I guess. So.
Interesting.
But it's just called Happiness because I adhere to the prompt.
You can always edit it after the Rattlecast. That's fair too.
No editing. Just put it out there.
Okay.
All right. So this is called Happiness. You can keep your damn basket full of puppies, tiered cakes loaded with rainbow sprinkles, your all-American field of smiley face emojis. I netted it when it landed on my daughter's face. Her eyelashes were wings as she wiggled away, dancing beneath falling cherry blossoms. How many years did she think it rained pink petals? Tonight, she asked me if unicorns exist. I told her the truth, that sometimes they stroll inside my mind and munch on clouds of cotton candy. Maybe that was why the sky was cloudless that time I rested on you in the ravine. The sun, a seedless slice of lemon, wildflowers swaying in the stained glass light, sage swishing in the air, scent, a kind of kite. And you held me, which alone is always enough. 2 bluebirds chirping on about our endless seas.
Yeah, excellent. That was a poem, of course, entitled Happiness. And Katie and I do the Poetry Space on Thursdays on Twitter. We had, it's sort of like a sandbox to kind of play around and talk about poetry as a group. Twitter Spaces work that way, where everybody gets to talk and share and call in. So the topic this week is what? Oh, regret poems.
Regret.
Yeah.
Yeah, regret poems. And nobody's going to be throwing sand, so don't worry. Come on over.
So if anybody has any poems they regret publishing or about regrets or whatever, feel free. We did, last week was the other word that was good.
Grateful. It was grateful. And we looked, one of the poems we looked at was Barbara Hamby's ode to, I'm not sure now if it's ode on or killing sadness. Was one of the ones we looked at that I brought up because it's a poem that always makes me feel grateful. So yeah.
Oh, great. Yeah. So if anyone wants to join in, that's Thursday. You got to be on Twitter to like participate though on the app. But yeah, looking forward to that, Katie. And thanks for joining and sharing that.
Or you can look at it on the podcast if you can't come make it live to Twitter too.
That is true. We record it for a podcast. So if I just go anywhere and go to the Poetry Space, type that in. Anyway, thanks, Katie.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Okay, bye. There's Katie Dozier with Happiness. Next up, let's see Carla Schwartz.
Hi.
Hey, Carla, how you doing today?
I am doing well, except I feel like I failed the prompt in the sense that I, well, in many ways, but I did extend the title. So,
well, you could always, I see the title is actually Happiness is Watching Ted Lasso, which I agree is like the only show I like.
Right.
But you could also just make it the title run in, so the first line could be is watching Ted Lasso.
Just like Katie did.
Exactly. We can all cheat in the same way, and it's fine.
Yes. Okay. So just pretend. Happiness is watching Ted Lasso. TV didn't mean much until season 3 when Apple doled the didn't mean much until season 3 when Apple doled the episodes out 1 week at a time on Wednesdays, well, technically Tuesdays, until the last one when we had to wait. Oh, it mattered. There was a heat wave and the Russians were destroying Ukraine, but GMT -4 rolled around and all we had to say was Ted Lasso and sigh. What was it about that show? Ted, Rebecca, Nate, Jamie, Roy, every character had something to learn, to grow from, even Sharon, the therapist. How important it was she be hired on to straighten out anyone who wished. Ted resisted visiting Sharon until he couldn't, until his labored breath sounded the alarm and he succumbed to being human. How many times, like Ted, have I thought, oh, what could I learn that I don't already know? Did growing up with my father leave such a mark? But there was Ted with Sharon on the phone, FaceTiming, or in the chair, owning his imperfections, discovering his fears. Not every scene was a downer. Rebecca found love anonymously. Roy expressed his feelings for Jamie. Sam smiled at the sky even when things turned sour. In the end, so long farewell, auf Wiedersehen, good night, a song you couldn't help smile at, sad as goodbyes are. When we had finished the season, I stared forlornly at the television, then to a friend who asked if we could Zoom with him. I said, of course, we're done with Ted Lasso. Ted Lasso on the television. Happiness.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, happiness is watching Ted Lasso. And I agree. And I had to tune out, like sort of space out at the very end because I haven't watched the last season yet, so I don't want to have any spoilers. But
No.
I'm going to once I get an Apple TV subscription again, which whenever that happens. But
Right.
but yeah, great poem. And I think, Ted Lasso, you're talking about gratitude. It's like a show about gratitude. Like Seinfeld's a show about nothing. Ted Lasso's kind of a show about gratitude. So I think that's what makes it work.
Indeed. And the thing about it, they released them on Wednesday nights for season 3, and what we found out was that you could actually watch it on Tuesday night, except for the last episode. Then they really held it until the 31st.
Yeah.
So there's no time for a second poem, is what you're saying, right?
Oh, definitely not now. We have 15
Okay.
people on the line now.
All right,
So definitely.
all right.
So it's and I'm glad you said that because I looked down. So we're going to have definitely a 1 poem limit now.
Right.
We'll take back our 2-page limit and just be 1 poem, but they can be up to 2 pages. So anyway, but yeah, thanks so much, Carla.
Thank you
Always
so
a pleasure.
much. Wonderful.
Take
Thank
care.
you. Yep.
It was Carla Schwartz with Happiness is Watching Ted Lasso. Let's go to a first-time caller. Jennifer Fossil is here.
Hello.
Hey, Jennifer.
Hi, everyone.
Yes.
Hi. Thanks for letting me be here. I
Yeah,
appreciate
so glad
it.
to have you. So, where are you calling from, first of all? It's nice to have first-time callers, fresh faces.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm from Maryland. My husband Brian O'Sullivan is on here frequently, so
okay,
he
cool.
has twisted my arm. So here I am.
Well, shout out to Brian. It's good that he got you on.
Thank you.
And
Oh,
I
thanks.
see your poem here too. Okay, so I see that's a prompt poem, given the title. Is there anything else you want to say about it, or do you want to jump right in?
I guess I'll jump in. Brian had mentioned the prompt, and it was just kind of spinning through my head all week, and so yeah, I just wrote what I shared. So I guess I'll just read it. Happiness. The most challenging poetic subject is happiness, my college poetry professor told us 30 years ago. What will you write about joy? One student wrote a poem about a misshapen strawberry, deciphering a miracle in its bulbous form. I wrote about my violin. An exercise soon turned to the Sturm und Drang of desire, the S-curved instrument become a metaphor for sex, of which I'd had exactly none. My longings have always been tragic, the half-empty glass, more a trick of temperament than history. The feast spread before me, it's the contortions of my mind that steal my zeal. I eat but don't taste, that ripe accident of a strawberry eluding me still. The pleasure is in the chewing, macerating the cut of meaning, the gnash of teeth and churn of gut, isn't it? Don't we have to agonize to understand, twist experience round and round to peer into its facets, seeking out its hard-won heart? No longer young, a month away from 50, I've been thinking about how I aim to cleave closer to laughter. It's always been there, crouching in the back, a withered, kindly crone with one eyebrow cocked at my seriousness, gentle and patient as eternity. I don't want to live in the tragic mode, I tell my husband, and we laugh, as we sometimes do, at the sheer ridiculousness of it all, and of ourselves, and of this fallen world where June strawberries wait in the field to be picked and tasted, resting like summer on the tongue.
Oh, that was great. Thanks so much for sharing that. I'm really glad you
Oh,
could be
thank
here.
you.
I'm
Thank you
curious,
so much.
between you and Brian, who started writing poetry first? Did you both been doing it for a while, or is it did one
Um,
get the other into it?
yeah, I think Brian sort of, we both wrote it in college. We didn't go to the same college, but yeah, mine kind of stopped, I think, after college, and Brian began writing during the pandemic. So yeah, he's sort of I've been watching all the great stuff he's doing, and it's fun.
Oh,
So
very cool. Well, I'm so glad you could join us. Hope you do it again soon.
oh, thank you so much.
Yep. Take care.
You too.
Yeah. Once again, that was Jennifer Fossil with Happiness. There are gonna be a lot of happinesses on this open lines. Let's see who is next. It's Deb T.
Hello.
Hello, Deb. How are you tonight?
I'm all right. How about you?
I'm great. It was a really easy episode to do.
Yes.
Barbara sort of
Yeah.
takes over and has a lot of interesting things to say. I kind of felt like I could
was
just let it run.
Yeah, I was noticing the similarity between the way she just naturally talks and her poetry.
Yeah,
And
it's true. It's true. It was. I was like, I really thought I could I'll just sit back and relax this time. So what do you have to share with us?
it was great. I also have a prompt poem, Happiness,
Mhm.
and I haven't been good at doing the prompt poems, but local poetry group, I found out a few days before you gave the happiness prompt that their prompt was to write something about joy.
Oh,
So I
that's
thought,
cool.
well, I'm hearing this message pretty loudly. So I have a short one. Happiness, shyer than joy, made of breeze, not sky, draws a little smile that I hide with my wrinkled hand, incubates under cover, fledges into weightless glide as I die.
Oh, that was great. And Deb, do you want, since it's such a short poem, almost haiku-ish, and my my computer kicked me out while you were reading it, so no one can see it. Do you want to read it again and just do it over?
Oh, sure. Okay. Happiness, shyer than joy, made of breeze, not sky, draws a little smile that I hide with my wrinkled hand, incubates under cover, fledges into weightless glide as I die.
Yeah, that's great. Happiness. Thanks so much, Deb.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that was Deborah Tannenbaum with another happiness poem. Next, we shall go to Mike Bales.
Good show. It's a different kind of poem. Boy, I've heard that before, that longer lines read fast, maybe the poem smoother. I like the Mondo Cadillac. It sounded like jazz. A long time ago, we had a poet here who wrote poems that kind of sound like jazz. She'd even like snap her fingers or something to it.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
it's
definitely
not
a lot
the
of
kind,
rhythm and a lot of rhyme in that, and a lot of riffing.
it's not the kind of music I listen to, but it's nice to hear jazzy things.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I was going to do my happiness poem. It's again taken from my big influence being a highway flagger, traffic control, and sometimes my fun times are when I'm not working and sightseeing.
Mm-hmm.
So this is set in Northwest Nebraska. Poem's Happiness. Roadwork delayed west of Valentine after my all-night drive. The morning left to me, maps showing bird sanctuaries, stir imagination. Of what I could see burst into the air. A drive south, concrete pavement glistens dreams, where from sandhills rise patches of grass and trees, fed by underground streams, under cover of placid skies after the night's storm. And surrounded by all this nothingness, I have everything I need. The drive ends by a shallow lake, such pleasure found when unsure of my time and place, such wonder embraced when knowing I may never live this life again.
Yeah, that's great. And I definitely know that feeling, Mike. It was kind of what I was getting at in my poem, too. But that there's, anytime you're doing work with your hands and outside, it sort of feels like so right that you're finishing something and you got the air and the sky. Yeah, I definitely.
That was squeezing in a little bit of time. I had the morning, then I ran to the library in Valentine and wrote whatever I wrote that morning. Then
Hmm.
the afternoon is kind of the long drag of work.
Yeah, yeah. Well, very cool. Well, thanks for sharing that, Mike. It's always a
Okay,
pleasure.
thanks.
Yep, take care. So Mike Bales with his happiness. And let's go to Katie Bucksbaum. Hey, Caitlin, how you doing?
Hello. I am doing awesome because I have a break from my residency that I just started.
Uh-huh.
So I'm only like an hour away from you now
Oh,
today.
wow, interesting. So where is that in Antioch? Is that what you
Yep.
said? Mm-hmm.
hmm
Oh,
And we
very
have
cool.
Juneteenth off, so I get to come here and do this.
Okay, so how long
Uh,
does the residency last?
10 days.
Uh-huh.
So we're about not quite halfway through.
Yeah, well, that's
Um,
the way to do it. I love those low residency programs.
yeah, but it's intense. Like the schedule's been jam-packed
Mm-hmm.
and my brain is overwhelmed with information. But um, I am hoping I could talk you into letting me read two
Yeah,
poems
yeah,
because they're both
they're
50
both short.
words.
So if they're like tiny poems, you can read two. It's like a 1 page minimum or something. I don't know if that makes sense. 2 page max, 1 page minimum, we'll say. Yeah, so feel free. There's two poems here. Go ahead.
Okay, so the first one is after it's called After a Jimmy Eat World concert in Anchorage, Alaska, and it's a golden shovel after Barbara Hamby's letter to a lost friend.
Ah, cool.
Nothing turns out how we expect. You know, lucky is less chance, more fate. We are star-crossed. We are waiting for the tides to rage with change. To be part of this sea best loved in midnight light, fought for outside of time. So even if there is no encore, stay a while. Eternalize the moment.
Oh, that's very cool. Yeah, after a Jimmy Eat World concert in Anchorage, Alaska, and hopefully, I think Barbara mentioned she was going to stay and just watch on the YouTube. So so she's probably watching and enjoying that golden shovel after her. That's really neat.
Yeah, and I loved her listening to her poems tonight. I haven't read a lot of her stuff, and I definitely keep an eye out for that upcoming book.
Yeah, very cool. So then, what's the next one?
The next one is a kind of silly little poem I wrote on last week's prompt. So I wasn't able to make it last week. And I thought I would read this poem. And I didn't do a happiness poem, so.
Okay, well, let's go ahead.
So this is called At the Park. A stranger approached me, and I said, "Hi," in a voice too high-pitched for the good-looking man who said hi back. He must have realized too late I was talking to his big, beautiful black dog.
That's a good one. At the park.
And honestly,
Mhm.
I don't know if he was good looking. I didn't even look at him. I just was
Just
like,
the
this is the
dog.
most beautiful dog I have ever seen.
Well, the dog is all you need anyway, so it doesn't matter.
That's what I hear.
Yeah, so two poems by Caitlin Bucksbaum. Good to see you, Caitlin, and hope you enjoy the rest of that residency.
Yeah, thanks.
Yep, take care.
Night.
Yeah, that was Caitlin Bucksbaum with those two poems, and let's go next to Zachary Honeycutt.
Hey Tim, how's it going, man?
Good, how you doing? It's good to see you.
I'm doing awesome. I know I haven't been on in a couple episodes.
Yeah,
So
so
as you
uh-huh.
can see, I'm rocking my Christian Pride shirt today because, as you all know, I'm a Christian. So I celebrate the fact that God made the rainbow, and to me, the rainbow symbolizes God's message that He'd never flood the earth again.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what my poem tonight is all about. And I actually have a special request from you, Tim.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the poem, I sent it to you twice.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I did that was because there's a secret message hidden within the poem. I actually sent this to you in the poet's response. So I'm going to ask that you let me read it. And then when I'm done reading it and I give you the signal to
Mm-hmm.
scroll down to the poem again so I can show you guys the secret message.
All right, it's an acrostic. Okay, let's hear it.
Yeah. Okay. Christian Pride. The time God observed their disgraceful ways, His heart was troubled by the human race, and He reserved the judgment of their days, that they had closed their hearts to His embrace. so he could no longer refrain. What wrath for earthly people who blindly have corrupted their ways, and as in Noah's day chose not to see the nearing storm, assigning winds to far-off days. They see the lightning, but ignore the thunder, hearts deafened to wisdom over God's ways, ever defiant, unaware of the days they're under. Rain fell for 40 days and 40 nights, as steadily as God's gaze into our hearts. Inside the ark, safe from watery plights, Noah and his family persisted by placing their faith in God, who insisted only they would live through soggy judgment, while God's merciful cup for earth ran dry. My God promised Noah, his family, every living creature spawned from his imagination, and every generation forward, you, me. Never again would he flood earth to destroy creation, since the time he set his rainbow in the clouds. And yes, now if you could scroll down to the poem again. But I colored the first line like a rainbow, and I wrote the entire poem around this one line, that's what the rainbow means. And basically, I always speak out about my belief in God, and I'm not ashamed to say that I'm a Christian and that I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. So to me, that's what the rainbow means, and I just thought that I would express my faith with you guys today.
All right. Well, thanks for sharing. That was Christian Pride by Zachary Honeycutt.
And next time I want to read this poem, Mother. I sent this to you in the Rattle Poetry Competition a couple of years ago, but this was my special Father's Day poem, and the reason it's called Mother is because it's all about how my father was more of a mother to me than my mother was. And it's kind of funny that Barbara was talking about poems that you worry whether or not other people will be able to handle them, and like poems that you feel embarrassed about sharing. But I always held back on reading this poem because it's kind of a personal poem. It's not like a Fox Feet poem that comes right out of my imagination, but it really just expresses the way I felt going back and forth in a divorced home. And it's all about, I think what my father means to me, and there's a lot of metaphors in it. So I definitely want to read this one on the 200th episode of Rattle.
All right. Well, thanks for sharing that, and definitely too long for today, but thanks for coming here, Zach.
Yeah. See you guys in a couple of weeks.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
That was Zachary Honeycutt with Christian Pride. And next up we have Audrey.
Is I okay?
You got to mute yourself there. There we go.
What?
You muted Zach. Okay. So, Audrey, how are you doing today?
Hi, terrific, Tim. Good to see you. I've been absent for a while.
Yeah, it's great to see you. So it's been a bit, but good to see you back.
Thank you. During the summers, I am not at home. Mm-hmm. So it gets very hard juggling grandchildren's bedtime stories and Rattlecast. But
yeah, well, that makes sense. And those grandma's bedtime stories are very important. So I don't blame you at all if you have to miss any.
They're everything.
They really are. Mm-hmm.
So I sent you 2 emails. One of them I realized I didn't put in an attachment, and the formatting may be a little screwy. Mm-hmm. So I sent one of them saying use this.
Yep, I got it.
Okay, so this was a prompt poem, although it doesn't look that way from the title, about happiness. And I wrote it as a high bun. Cardiac ICU. The doctor called. You were out of surgery, and I could visit in a couple of hours. I struggled to block out images of you on a cold steel gurney, tubes and pumps. Someone other than me had your heart in his hands. I walked endless corridors filled with fear, stepping through pings and electronic blips and beeps to find you resting in a recliner, smiling, your voice, my favorite music. Obsidian night pierced by scepters of sun. Darkness is friable.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, great hype in there. I love the haiku at the end. Thanks for sharing that, Aubrey. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good to see you too.
Yep. Have a good night. Enjoy those grandkids.
Could we hear that line again? Someone other than me?
Yeah, sure.
Have your heart?
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
I struggled to block out images of you on a cold steel gurney, tubes and pumps. Someone other than me had your heart in his hands.
Yeah, that is a great line. Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that, Audrey. And for Laura, you can go to the YouTube and see the poem too anytime you want after the fact. By the way, but yeah, Audrey, thanks so much for joining us once again.
Thank you, Tim.
Okay.
Bye.
Yeah, bye. And next up is Laura Berg. Hey, Laura, how you doing?
Hi. Okay, well, I guess I should call this poem Happiness.
Okay, yeah, and first of all, I think you're a first-time caller. Where are you calling from?
I'm also calling from Maryland.
Oh, nice.
So, yeah.
Okay, I'm trying to find, is this, let's see. Oh, there it is. So I have, what do I want that I can't have back? Is that right?
Yeah, but I'll call it Happiness.
Okay, perfect. Yeah,
Okay.
sounds good. Okay, let's hear it.
Happiness. What do I want that I can't have back? My parents, my past. I want to change what I want into what I've got. Pick asters again with my parents by the river. Happiness, my mama would say, raising an eyebrow. Is that what matters most? Mama, this is America. The pursuit of happiness is inscribed in us at birth, like God's name whispered in a baby's ear. As if abracadabra, I have what I want. My past and my parents are mine after all. I pick a fistful of asters, swim in the river.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks so much for sharing that. That was happiness, we're going to call it. So thanks so much. Really glad you could join. Hope you can share more poems in the future, too.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. That was Laura Berg with Happiness. Now let's go to Tom Barlow. Moving on down the list.
Tim.
Hey, Tom, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. I usually have a poetry reading on Monday nights, but I got a cold, so I skipped tonight. Luckily allowed me to take part in this.
Yeah, that's perfect. And so far, there's no, being on Zoom isn't contagious, so no problem there.
Yeah.
So what do you have?
Now,
what do you like to share?
This is probably more appropriate as the first poem for the regrets theme on Thursday. It's not anything about happiness. It's a persona poem.
Well, that's all good too. Anything goes, and it's good to break up the happiness a little bit too. I've always found a little backdrop for it.
Yeah, well, this will break it up well.
Okay.
Called Relapse. Remember those wooden hand paddles with the rubber balls attached to them by foot-long rubber bands? Sometimes late at night when I can't shake the jitters, I sneak one from the boys' toy stash and smack that ball as hard as I can. But all it does is fly right back at me over and over and over. We're driving through Chillicothe at 3 a.m, the downtown spooky as an abandoned mall, as though a neutron bomb, the one that would kill all the people but leave their properties intact, has exploded here. I'm off the oxy again, and I remind my husband about my gallstones and my angina and the hammer toe and the hot flashes, and how my spine is bent from the weight of my breasts, and how my knees are bone on bone, and of course the PTSD and a bad wisdom tooth, and how I have to soak my hands in hot water before I can open the fucking jar of coffee. And with every word, I can hear the slap of that ball hitting that paddle again. But he says nothing, as usual. Keeps peeking up at the sky, as though watching for that bomb. And I'm afraid he's thinking, bring it on.
Yeah, excellent poem, Relapse. Thanks so much for sharing that, Tom.
Thank you.
It was Tom Barlow with Relapse. Next, we have Guy Chambers.
Hey, Tim. How's it going?
Hey, Guy. Good. Yeah, it's been a bit for you, too, I think. Good to see you.
It's been a while since 194 was on the last one. I've been tied up a few Mondays. I couldn't get around to it. So,
oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah. But I still like that poem Mumble Cadillac by Barbara. Just the name itself, it just
That is a
grabbed me
great
like
title.
that.
Yeah, I love that.
And once she mentioned it, says, I hope she's going to read it. And I read it, go, wow, that was really good. So that's good. Yeah, it's too bad. I got this one poem here. Actually, I was going to read my other poem that got published in Australia. I wish it would have Tinker's Dam. It has one line in there called Railroad Ode. I would have fit right in for this one with Barbara,
Oh, for
but
sure, yeah.
I'll read it some other time.
Mhm.
So, but this is one poem I just virtually just got this done here. It's one of those poems I just started writing a couple lines and just say, where's it going to take me? And it just kept going and going, and it came up with this. So this poem is called Days That Was Those. Counted in life, raw road feet from the muddy crossroads thoroughfare. Sweaty eyes, red nose dyed, smile hogtied. Fingertips worn to the bone, arthritis ingrown. Sitting in a rocking chair, way on once a pond, drinking white lightning to forget those old days. Playing from town to town, singing to the time for a grime of a dime. Days that was those. Scarecrow guitar, standing in the corner, never, ever, not too far. Slowly played the blue double chords with a wrench words about the hardship feels, merely only to one's kind. On the other hand, being pushed aside by the others, by the burnings on the lawns. Days that were those. A pistol on the coffee table that had lurked in the dark. Don't want to remember those days, but they were there and real. Full token. Speak to his alone. Life is short, like gasoline. Off the chest, the soul utters the stories, but the skeleton tells no tales for the years that has been. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. A pleasure as always, Guy. That was Days That Was Those by Guy Chambers. Thanks, Guy.
Yep, you're welcome.
Yep, have a good night. And next we have Jennifer Elise Wang.
Hey, Tim.
Hey, Jennifer, how you doing tonight?
I'm good. Kind of have something that's a little bit the opposite of happiness, but it kind of relates because whenever I'm referred to with they, them pronouns, that I often say that brings me great joy. You don't have to. So mine was
great. Yeah.
yeah, a poet's respond piece about Demi Lovato talking about how they've also started using she, her, and just kind of her being like misquoted by some articles where they talk about how like she's tired of it, but she's really tired of the misgendering and kind of how I relate to it because we're both bilingual and how our like native languages also kind of navigate that the they them pronouns. So
yeah, very interesting. Let's hear it.
So she they. When I say I'm tired of using they them, I mean I'm tired of writing in non-binary when there are only boxes for male or female. I would prefer not to select, prefer not to answer, as if I am making a choice. In reality, checking that box makes me want to curl up and die, a starved soul like Bartleby. I'm tired of facing the remorse that comes with every correction. It's exhausting to shoulder the emotions of every loved one wanting to be acknowledged for trying their best without acknowledging my own feelings, my actual identity. I'm tired of looking to other languages, so I don't need to confront he or she and finding that I must choose between an O ending or an A ending, or that the words spoken are gender neutral, yet I still have to write boy or girl in the logogram of my pronoun. I'm tired of choosing the comfort of X and being accused of embracing a colonial mindset. When I say I'm tired of using they, them, and you stop listening to the rest of my sentence, I split myself further to wedge myself back into one end of the binary.
Oh, yeah, very, very interesting. Thanks so much for sharing that, Jennifer.
Yeah, and just like a little trivia. So I always like Mandarin is gender neutral when you speak it, but when you write it, the ta that you refer to as yourself, you do have to write in your character for like boy or girl. And I learned that recently.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
A little surprise, yeah.
Yeah, for a language that doesn't have that spoken. Yeah, very interesting. It's such a complicated, interesting thing for sure. Yeah, thanks so much, Jennifer. It's always great.
Hey, thank you.
Bye. So Jennifer Lee Wang with she, they. You got Rob Harris next.
Hi, how are you?
Hey, Rob. Good. How are you?
Thanks for taking my Zoom.
Yeah, definitely. Always a pleasure.
This one is Gone in a Flash. It's I sent it in for Poets Respond. There's a bit of a backstory because I had first written it back in early May when I heard of the death of Tori Bowie, who was an Olympic sprinter. She died at the age of 32, which seemed very crazy young to me, especially for an elite athlete. So I wrote a poem, I sent it in. It was a little bit longer than I wanted it to be. So then the word came out this week of the autopsy report was done, and it revealed something. I guess I sort of thought when somebody dies that young, there's probably going to be drugs involved or something like that. But it wasn't that at all. It was she was pregnant. She was 8 months pregnant, actually, and she went into labor and died in childbirth. And I said, oh, this was a twist that I hadn't seen. A lot of people hadn't seen it. So I figured not only did I rework the poem with what we had discovered, but I also shortened it a lot because I think the whole premise of the poem is based on speed and quickness. And the title Gone in a Flash kind of hints that it should be, short. So I shortened it up dramatically and added an ending and made a point, or at least I tried to.
Yeah,
so,
well, that was perfect because I needed a longer explanation for the shorter poem because I couldn't find it for a bit, but I have it now. So
well, it's about half as long as it was in the first place, and I think it fits the theme better. So it goes like this: Gone in a Flash. She was once the fastest woman alive and won gold medals to prove it less than a decade ago. From a tiny town in Mississippi to the pinnacle of athletic competition, the life of Tori Bowie seems a blur, with the ultimate finish line now behind her. Her death in childbirth reminds us all of the heightened dangers of pregnancy for Black women in America. I did not know that Black women are 3 times more likely than white women to die in childbirth. And it seems to me that any sort of laws or legislations or restrictions really have got to have exceptions to save the life of the mother, because I don't know, she was found in Florida. I know that they just enacted the 6-week law, which seems just crazy restricted, but it seems like if the idea is to have children born, then if you're not allowing her to save her own life, then what have you really accomplished?
Yeah, and all the future babies gone too, as well, if you care about babies. So, yeah.
So she's dead. Her child is dead. Everybody loses, and so if nothing else, I just wrote this to memorialize her life. And there's so much going on in the news. I don't know how much attention this really gets, but I just felt like it was a tragedy all the way around.
Yeah.
So I wrote that.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for bringing that to light and sharing the poem. I appreciate it.
Looks like I'm the last one in the room. So.
No, actually, we got a bunch more. We got 4 more.
Oh, there's more. Okay.
Yep.
I don't see them. Okay, good. Oh, yep. I see 7. All right, good. Well, I didn't want to. So I guess I'm. All right. Well, anyway, thanks for listening. I appreciate it.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks a lot. Once again, that was Robert Harris with Gone in a Flash. We got Brent Stauffer next. Brent hasn't been on in a while. You got to turn on his camera and his mic, though. Hey, Brent, quick as a flash. There he is.
How's it going?
How you doing?
I'm doing great. Yeah, it's been a good show. It's been a really good show. And I first kind of balked at the. I do this sometimes. I balk at the prompt, and I think, oh no, what am I going to do with that? That's gonna. But I looked up happiness at poetryfoundation.org and found 6 poems on there named just happiness.
Yeah, I can think of a few. We had a few at Rattle too, actually, which I'd play if we'll have time. Hey, Brett, is there like a microphone not plugged in? You sound unusually like quiet and like it might be you're far away or something. Is there a different mic setup?
Yeah, no, I think I don't know. You sound unusually loud to me, so I don't know what's happening.
Yeah, well, I can turn it up, and I think it's okay. It just sounds a little distant. But anyway, yeah, let's hear the poem.
Okay, here we go. Happiness. Two red birds on a white vase, immortal as any lovers. The tip of my pen darting, the once empty sketchbook. You on the bed reading, yellow lamplight falling. I'm not drawing you. I'm writing fast as I can. 20 years from now, I'll forget what I wrote. The whole loft quiet as a blank canvas. Sandalwood incense smoke hangs around like an old friend. Now and then, you turn a page.
Well, that was great as always. Thanks so much for sharing that, Brett. Yeah, it's great to see you again. Been a bit, and hope you can come back soon.
Yeah, I hope so too.
Yep.
Thanks, Tim.
Yep.
Thanks,
Always a pleasure. Take care.
All right. Bye.
So Brent Stauffer with Happiness. And let's go. I don't know. Hang on one second. I gotta close this window. That's better. The wind is really gusting out there all of a sudden. Anyway, let's go. We got 3 people left. Let's go to Spartacus next. If he's still awake, we'll see if he wakes up. It's very late where he is. Hey, Spartacus, are you there?
Hi.
Hey, yeah, it's great to see you. Thanks for staying up again. It's
Nice
like
to see you.
4 a.m. or whatever it is.
5.
5. Oh, it's even worse. Oh, unless you woke up early. And so what do you have to share?
I just want to say firstly that the readings of Barbara were great. I could listen to her for hours.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got 2 prompt poems. I would like to read the short one, the second one.
Okay, you could do both because it's the short one's so tiny. The second one's so tiny. Just do both.
Both. Okay, cool. Happiness. What I lack tonight, I am wondering. I don't have flour and cinnamon. You can't make cookies if you don't have the ingredients. I need all of them. I need to go to the shop. I need to go out. What time is it? An old lady asks me, on my way to the shop. She is sitting on a bench. She holds a lot of heavy shopping bags. I'm wondering if she needs to learn the time or tries to start a conversation. I can't see well in the dark, she adds. 10 o'clock, I reply. Thank you, she says. A tiny girl approaches and stands next to her, waiting for someone. She wears a shiny circle necklace with the yin and yang symbol. This is so cool, jewelry, the old lady says to the girl. It is a gift from my friend, the girl says. They are always valuable at the beginning, the old lady says and smiles. And the second one?
Mm-hmm.
A butterfly in a museum of natural history. Child, be quick, catch it, if it is real.
Oh, that's great too. I love the short one especially. Excellent poems. Thanks so much for staying up late and sharing it with us, Spartacus.
Thank you.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Have a good night. Spartacus Agnosterus with 2 happiness poems. Let's go next to Jerry Stephenson.
Tim, can you hear me?
I can hear you. How you doing tonight, Jerry?
I'm doing good. Yes, I am. I got a happiness poem for you tonight.
Oh, great. I think you sent it as a page file, so I can't actually open it. The clock watches, but just read it. We'll listen.
Okay, I will. I'll start it off. Title, Worry or Not, Be Happy. Happiness isn't a lot of things. It isn't a flat tire on a dead-end road. Well, maybe if it was the road to hell. Happiness hides in little things that aren't flat tires, like your lover's lost earring you found while looking for the jack. Happiness can find you where you least expect it, when you pay for the tire repair in the form of a wallet-crushed Benjamin. Happiness lies in lack of surprise. Is the bonus pack or add-on, say a smooch from your sweetie, when you didn't feel that you earned it.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that, Jerry. And, I was thinking as you were saying you're going to read the poem that you seem like an expert on happiness. So it's good to have some good advice for Jerry Stephenson.
I work hard on it.
Yeah, well, it seems like you do, and it seems like your work is paying off because you do seem like one of the happy people I know, Jerry.
Thank you very much, Tim. Great show again tonight. Barbara was so vibrant.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
What a treat. Love the show as ever. Right. Good night. Have a wonderful evening. And looking forward to seeing you next time.
Yep. You have a good night too, Jerry.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Yep. Jerry Stephenson with, I forgot the title, but a great poem there. Excellent advice, as I thought it would be. Let's go. We have Lucy Chow still on the line. She's going to be the last person on the Zoom.
Hello, Tim.
Hey, Lucy. How you doing tonight?
Great. I didn't think I could be here with you today because I just had an exam, but I handed in the paper early. It's turned out to be fairly easy. So
that's great.
Here I am.
Great to hear on multiple levels. Glad you're here. Glad it was easy too. So what do you have to share with us?
I've got a prompt poem that I'm pretty proud of because this idea of happiness, I was thinking about it and it turned out to be a dangerous or kind of an insidious idea to me because it got me thinking about this character in Douglas Adams' novel, the restaurant at the end of the universe. In it, there is this solution to our human problem of causing so much unhappiness in the world because we want to be happy, especially so much unhappiness to the animals that we eat.
Yeah,
and the solution is to engineer happiness into these unhappy animals so that there is this kind of religion among them that to be eaten by a human being is happiness itself.
Oh, wow.
So here is my exploration of that idea, and you will probably see that I'm taken into some pretty dark, but also darkly not dark territories. Yeah.
Okay,
I'll read the poem.
Yeah, go ahead.
Happiness for Douglas Adams. I am born a happy boviness by your leave. Since my days as a sportive calf, my body has been yearning for something that can't, curiously, be named, perhaps because it's too terrible or tremendous a beauty. Anyway, this sculptured mass of perfect bound flesh, musculature stretched on bones as magically as multi-dimensional strings on the armature of the cosmos, stitched with a liquid thread that starts and ends nowhere, everywhere, which pulls life into each part of the fabric, sluiced over by a broad sunset river, brown with fertile mud and constantly overflowing into Sepfusk night. This enormous, ecstatic, esurient, esculent flesh has never been less than happy with all that it can call its own. Its robust vim, its succulence, and above all, its usefulness and native alacrity to be used. Use is the utmost beauty, and beauty gives an irrefutable goodness and truth to being me, no other, just me's fat, meaty essence. I'm always this happy because I am born this way, which sounds obvious, but is it? Sometimes I hear about distant relations dim sisters and cousins from epochs ago, who chafed against their necessary end, who champed dry, stained straw, mourning theirselves soon about to be dealt what was named the mortal wound by their dread. The story went that they were disconsolate because they thought salvation impossible. But they have been saved, after all, if not as this or that cow, at least as kind, from unhappiness. I am born one of their kind, courtesy of your kindness, ma'ams and sirs. But my birth has been such that I believe in dying a good death. And because it's you who's given that gift, I'm happy to forgive that you have made me a happy creature, because happy meat is healthier to eat. Because God also sometimes forgives his creatures for wanting to be happy. Now, my honorable guests, enough has been said of philosophy, and I'd like to meet that terrible, tremendous beauty in a windowless house further afield. I assure you it shall be swift, squeaky clean. And when I am done, let the carnival begin.
Oh, very interesting poem. Thanks so much for sharing that, Lucy. It's funny that you said that, because my son, who's turning 9 in a couple days, I gave him the full set of The Hitchhiker's Guide as one of his birthday presents this year. And I was thinking about it just yesterday as I was, putting it in a little gift bag, jealous that he gets to read it all. I kind of want to reread the whole collection again, and then this poem pops up. It's so many funny, interesting, thought-provoking things going on in that book.
Yeah,
thanks so much,
it was
Lucy.
a great series.
Yeah, it definitely is. Yeah, thanks as always. A pleasure hearing that poem, Lucy.
Bye, Tim.
Bye. So Lucy Chow with Happiness, another prompt poem. And that's going to be it for the Zoom. I'm going to shut this down. And we're going to go over to read a couple more extra bonus poems as we have a couple minutes left. Let's see. We have Emily DeFerrari has a poem, Happiness. Let's see how that goes. This is Emily DeFerrari 1, Happiness. Happiness takes a hatchet to the empty hull and sinks the ship that should never have sailed, saving every soul that didn't set foot from that familiar destiny. Happiness steals fire and brimstone and ignites the arsenals before the weapons are shouldered and the sky is filled with stars of its own making. A hard master, a spark in the night, a stone flying, the pursuit of things that are just. 2. Happiness. Lila, Lydia, and Natalie took turns running down my deck and jumped flying into the grass with death-defying squeals. Harry came out of his house and sang, "Thank Heaven for Little Girls." Later, Harry left his old wife and moved in with his high school sweetheart. When his Parkinson's got bad, the girlfriend kicked him out, and he came to live with his daughter, Dia, who was working on her opioid recovery. At Harry's funeral, Dia told me it had been an honor to care for him those last years. And that was another interesting poem, Happiness in 2 sections, by Emily DeFerrari. Thanks for sharing that, Emily. Turn down too much light. All right. Let's go to Nivedita Karthik's poem on happiness. And here we go. Happiness. This is Nivedita's poem. So here we go. Happiness. Happiness is a gentle, blessing grace that whispers sweetly in the silent night. In the realm of true and pure serenity, happiness dances unabashed with unbound glee. Happiness is a shy and tender sprite who often hides in shadows, unseen by light. But deep within the quiet chambers of our hearts, she weaves her magic spells, a mystic work of art. And then it happens, springs forth from the depths of our being, like a gentle breeze forever freeing. Happiness is neither a fleeting state nor a destination we contemplate. It resides within our tranquil core, just waiting for us to open the door. Finally, happiness, the shy and tender sprite that resides within, showers us with a world of delight. That's something that was Nivedita Karthik's poem, Happiness. Thanks so much for sharing that. It's really interesting to see everybody's takes on happiness. Variations on a theme. Let's see. Trying to see if we have any more happiness poems. Jayanthi Rangan has a poem as well. This is Stress Fracture. We'll see what this is. This is once again Jayanthi Rangan. And here we go, stress fracture. I knew I was sitting on a termite's nest when I saw a lone one from the infestation. First, Mo lost her job and my polyp prognosis was due. 6-year-old hiccuped his snotty life through his heaving t-shirt. His best friend found a new best friend. A Lexington crossing, I waited for the walk sign. When the light blinked, I did too. Rooted, I heard the traffic roar. In the water table of my eyes vaguely saw a stranger who walked past and then came back. May I give you a hug? I nodded and he gave it to me. A tourniquet for my disturbance, an eye for the walk sign. Excellent, a stress fracture. Interesting poem by Janthi Rongan. Thanks for sharing that, Janthi. And I think that's all we have for the prompt poems. Let me, like I said, I would read a couple happiness poems on rattle.com. And there are a couple I'm thinking of. And let's see. Let's do, well, so Mike White's Happiness is an all-time favorite. It's one of Mike White's short poems in his signature style. Here is Mike White, Happiness. Happiness fills a room. Happiness fills half a room. No one around to lift the thing. All those parts, after a while, you give up, even dusting. That is a Mike White poem, Happiness. And let's do, one of my favorite poems is 7 Happy Endings, which is not happiness quite, but you could call it happiness. Let's just read this by Leung Lee. I love this poem. It's been a while since I've read it anywhere. 7 Happy Endings. Love, 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 where are we now? Where did we begin? I think one of us wanted to name this, wanted to call it something. Shadows on the garden wall, a man rowing alone out to sea, a song in search of a singer. I think that was me. I wanted to call it something. And you were happy with a room, 2 rooms and a door to divide them, and daylight on the other side of the door, borrowed music from an upstairs room, and bells, bells from down the street, bells to urge our salty hearts. I wanted to call it something. I needed to know what we meant when we said we, when we said us, when we said this. So call it 7 happy endings. That would be enough. You see, I woke up one night and realized I was falling. I turned on the lamp and the lamp was falling, and the hand that turned on the lamp was falling, and the light was falling, and everything the light touched falling. And you were falling asleep beside me. And that was the first happy ending. And the last one, it went something like this. A child sat down, opened a book, and began to read. And what he read out loud came to pass, and what he kept to himself stayed on the other side of the mountains. But I promised 7 happy endings, I who know nothing about endings, I who am always at the beginning of everything, even as our being together always feels like a beginning. Not just the beginning of our knowing each other, but the beginning of reality itself. See how you and I make this room so quiet with our presence. With every word we say, the room grows quieter. With every word we keep ourselves from speaking even quieter. And now I don't know where we are, still needing to call it something. A clock the bees unearth, gathering the overspilled minutes. That was Leung Lee from Rattle number 25 with 7 happy endings. That's not the poem I meant to read. There was a poem by... let me see if I can find the one I actually meant, because I think it's by Mike Good. Now I think that the name came to me. There's just, if you Google happiness and rattle, there's a lot of poems come up. But I think there's one by Mike Good. Maybe with an E? John Good, that's the name. Yeah. I don't remember why I was thinking of this poem, but I was thinking of this one as I was reading. So here's another poem called Happiness. And we'll close out the show with this, then the Sciku. But here we go. This is John Good, Happiness. And this is from Rattle 28. Happiness. He found it on the side of the road, blood smeared across its fur like a stripe of red flag, and flies filled the air, too many to count. Back in the war, his wife used to make sense of things like this in long letters he held in his hands. But she was gone, and the generals were gone too. The sun was there with the flies, as it had been before, and their metallic green bodies glowed as they dove into the wreck, their tongues like dreams their stomachs couldn't wake. The dog had been missing for days. The man had no evidence of its nostrils smoking like guns, or its black pelt slick with the sweat of a hunt. He hadn't seen the rabbit either, skipping out over the tall weeds, 4 pounds of meat, hovering in the dog's eyes like happiness. He knew it had been there. That is Happiness by John Good. John Good, Happiness. So there's some other extra bonus happiness poems for you. And that's going to wrap up the show. Let's do the Sciku. And the Sciku this week is based on this article from Penn Medicine, which is really relevant to me locally because the pine pollen is just everywhere. Oh my gosh. What a year for pine pollen. It's like this layer over everything. It's almost like fluorescent neon yellow-green too. But here's this article from Penn Medicine. And the article is like this: Penn researchers provides better understanding into how genes make us prone to allergies. Slight alterations in ETS1 protein level can add to allergic inflammation. So they looked through and found the genetic link, or one of the many genetic links, and the complicated ways that they interact by making proteins a little bit different. And then, the immune system is just so complicated. And so finding a little step forward in understanding how allergies work, because there's so many people allergic to everything. I met a kid the other day allergic to... just a whole bunch of it. I couldn't eat anything. It was sad. And so really interesting research into this. But thinking about the the pollen outside and everything. Here's my Sciku, right here. Oops, that one. Familiar shapes in the yellow dust, pining. Familiar shapes in the yellow dust, pining. That is your Sciku for this week, and that is the show for the week. And I mean about the dust. Let me see. I open this window. Can you see this? Can you see that? Hey, you can't really see it, but man, there's so much pollen everywhere. But anyway, that's the Sciku for this week. Thanks everybody for joining us. As always, it's always so much fun to do these. Barbara was great. The open lines were great. It was a real pleasure. Thank you all for being here. Next week's, the prompt next week. I almost forgot to say it because everybody can probably guess what the prompt is going to be. Write an ode, of course, but write an ode to an object in the room you're sitting in right now. That is your prompt for this week. Write an ode to an object in the room you're sitting in right now. That kind of limits it. There's a lot of stuff in the room I have here. I can write an ode to my on-air sign, to that hydrangea bush or whatever I want. You can write an ode to whatever you like, but it's got to be something in the room wherever you are. So you're like sort of stuck wherever you're listening to this right now for possibilities. But with some narrowing comes some help too. So if that's your help, write an ode to an object in the room you're sitting in right now. And you have actually 2 weeks to do it, because next week on the Rattlecast, we're going to be out of town. I'm going to be with Kate Dozier at the Haiku North America Conference, giving the Higginson lecture about the future of haiku. And so that's going to be a lot of fun in Cincinnati, but I'll be, it starts a few days after the Rattlecast, but I'll be out of town anyway. And so no show next week, my one-ish week off. And so in 2 weeks, the guest is going to be NFT poets. We're going to have a bunch of poets from our NFT poetry issue. Not exactly sure who. We have Sasha Stiles and Anna Maria Caballero coming up in future episodes, so I don't think we're going to have them there. We definitely have Justin Tagg. We're going to have a whole bunch of people from the new issue, and we'll talk about NFTs and what that can do for poetry, and enjoy some of their work. And it'll be sort of a roundtable like we did for that anthology a couple months ago. This will be rattle number 200, our 200th episode, Monday, July 3rd. And let me tell you one thing before I go to next week, as long as I get it done, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to. At the regular time, there's going to be no show, but I am going to have a preview, or what's it called, a debut on YouTube. If you go to our YouTube channel, I'm going to air the interview with Ian McGilchrist. That was from, we did it about in September last year. And it was published in print in the winter issue. I always meant to release that as a podcast, a standalone thing. So I'm going to do that next week. It's going to premiere, that's the word. It's going to be premiere on YouTube at the regular time. So if you want to gather around and watch it live, that discussion with everybody else, the chat windows will be up and you can participate in that way. But I won't actually be here. I'll be in Cincinnati, or the Cincinnati area anyway. And then we'll be back with episode 200 with NFT poets. So you have 2 weeks to write your ode. Hope you have a great 2 weeks in the meantime, and I will see you later. Good night.